Welcome to the Live Fully with Kratom podcast. I'm ETHA co-founder Alexander, and with me is head of customer service Amanda. Good morning, Amanda.
Good morning.
So today we are going to talk about where does Kratom come from? Let's get started.
Yes, so today's topic is kind of like a remake of an old episode. And honestly, it's been a very common question that I still get to this day, many years later, is where does Kratom come from? What is it? What does it look like? Where does it grow? All these things. And fortunately for us, we do have plants in the store. So we're able to show them, or in the stores, to show them what it looks like, that we grow it here locally in Vista as well. And then I just go into like the very basic knowledge of where it's from and all that stuff. But that's what we're going to talk about today, so that people actually can get a little bit more than just the very basic and dive deep into it a little bit.
Sounds good. Yes, Kratom is the common name of a tree that grows in the jungles of Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia. The Latin name is Mitragynine speciosa. It is part of the Rubaceae family, so it's related to the coffee family of plants, and that's probably why it produces some physiological active alkaloids. So coffee produces caffeine, Kratom produces other alkaloids like Mitragynine, Speciogynine, Speciociliatine, Paynantheine, these pharmacokinetic active alkaloids that are responsible for the perceived effects that people get when consuming Kratom.
Really quick, since you talked about the four alkaloids that we kind of focus on, I'm still learning more of the Speciocynine. Can you just briefly describe the four, just so that people who are listening or watching, actually, can understand what those four alkaloids may help with?
Yes, and the research is evolving on this as we, as a scientific community, us humans in general, understand more about how the alkaloids interact with the different receptors. Mitragynine is generally the most predominant alkaloid. Mitragynine does interact with multiple receptors, interacts with the mu opioid receptor, the kappa opioid receptor. It also interacts with the serotonin receptor, the dopamine receptor, and also the alpha-adrenergic receptor. And so that's why there's kind of this complexity of effects that people kind of like associate with Kratom. So on the opioid receptors, that's a lot of the analgesia or the pain relief research that goes on. That also is probably some of the, say, dysphoria. When people consume too much Kratom, there's kind of like nausea or kind of uneasy feeling. That could be because of the kappa opioid receptor. Yeah,
very sensitive to the high
yes. Some of the serotonin receptor activity that is around could be some of the non-opioid receptor pain relief, but that serotonin receptor is also part of the kind of boost in mood or antidepressant effect, anti-anxiety effect. The dopamine receptor, again, kind of like that mood boost or some of that perception of energy feeling. That dopamine response could also be some of the muscle cramping. I know that if I use a lot of Kratom, like my back pain is really tight, sometimes I've noticed that my muscles can tighten up, where if I grab something with my muscles, it kind of overactivates the muscle and it's hard to relax it. So some that's why I also add in magnesium supplementation into my diet.
Just
to kind of
Kratom
help
in
that.
general, or high mid Kratom or low mid, or have you noticed a pattern?
I mean, it's definitely when I'm taking higher levels of Kratom for my pain relief. So that higher just use of the alkaloids probably overactivates some of the dopamine system in our body. At least that's according to Dr. Edward Boyer, who I kind of asked about, hey, I see some of these, side effects when I use Kratom at higher doses. What could be responsible for that? And it could be the dopaminergic or the dopamine system that is activated through Kratom.
And how does the magnesium help support or help, I guess, diffuse that feeling or that reaction?
Sure. So our body, essentially, the muscles are activated by a certain system of, you get electrical stimulation from your brain to close on the muscles, and that is like a salt-based system. And so the magnesium is what generally relaxes the muscle. So that magnesium is needed to uncontract the muscle. And that's why magnesium can be good for like sore muscles or overused tight muscles. That magnesium's a really good supplement.
Is magnesium salt based?
Yes, I mean magnesium is
magnesium
is a salt mineral basically.
So that's why when you like want to hydrate yourself, you have like salt in your water to help your muscles uncramp, because when you're dehydrated, it's the same thing. I'm assuming it's the same thing.
Exactly.
Like,
yep.
Like your muscle goes and then you get tight and then you get cramps.
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
yeah. So,
okay.
or at least that's part of it. And so, yes, our body needs electrolytes. We need the sodium, but we also need magnesium and potassium, as well as other electrolytes, minerals, and that we don't necessarily get from our food supply anymore.
That's
so
why
that's
you like the Sweato when you were in, I think,
yeah, exactly.
Because it's the mineral water, salt, lemon. I don't know what the lemon does, probably the flavor, but how do you get potassium other than the common? The only thing I can think of is banana. But
yeah, banana's pretty good. I mean, I also like coconut water because it has a lot of high minerals, including potassium. There's also cream of tartar is actually a very high potassium.
Is that what you eat with your steak? Or is it
cream sometimes
of tartar is...
Yeah, I mean it's generally like an herb. Like you'll find it in the herb section of the grocery store. Okay. And normally I don't know, it's normally used for like sauces but yeah, cream of tartar is actually a lot of potassium, is like half of that kind of salt based, I believe. And so
is that what you creme fraiche is what you eat with the caviar. I was confusing creme fraiche with that.
Yeah, creme fraiche is essentially
interesting
cream.
Okay. Yeah, coconut water is really good. I never really used to be a big coconut water person, but I don't know, maybe because I'm older, my palate's getting more sophisticated, I guess. I don't know. They actually do like the coconut water, especially the fresh one you get from the actual coconut. Obviously, that's probably the best source, but...
Okay, yeah, so cream of tartar, so thank you, Nicole, for looking it up. It seems to be a byproduct of fermenting grapes into wine. The science name is potassium bitartrate, so aka potassium hydrogen tartrate or tartic acid. So yes, there's quite a bit of potassium in cream of tartar, which I was, when I was playing soccer and I was younger growing up, I'd also have a lot of like cramping, but it was mainly like the cramping kind of in the side of the stomach that was an issue. And so that's when I started to supplement with potassium. And that would really help the muscles and kind of that cramping in the side of my stomach be alleviated.
Okay, I didn't know that. Something new, I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's hard because it's shockingly hard to find potassium. Because even if you look at a banana content, there is. Bananas are like notorious for potassium.
Yeah.
But even if it's like when I think I was looking up the nutrition facts of banana, and it was like you get maybe 5% of the potassium you need from a banana. I'm like, well, okay, well, I'm playing a lot of soccer. I'm getting these cramps. I can't just eat like 20 bananas a day. Like, how can I get some other form of potassium? Because I really just am really deficient in it.
So that covers what you said Mitragynine is. Then what are the other three kind of like, what's the short version, I guess?
Yeah, so Speciociliatine, Speciogynine also have some interaction with the serotonin receptors, as well as Paynantheine has interaction with the serotonin receptor. And that could be kind of part of that perception of mood boost, kind of anti-anxiety, antidepressant that we talk about. The Paynantheine is also a smooth muscle relaxer from the research. So that could be kind of why... I'll use some of our Sunset that has higher Paynantheine for when my muscle and back is really locked up and tight. I'll kind of switch over to the Sunset to kind of ease those muscles open and kind of let my body kind of get back to the fluid motion and be able to recover. There's also other alkaloids that have some of the anti-inflammatory properties, have some of the vasodilation. So it's a really complex system of more than like 40 plus alkaloids in Kratom that really drive a lot of these different benefits.
So if you are looking, because you essentially are the one that's making these, I would call them recipes, not even blends now, because you go off of the profile every time the lab test results come in. It's a different recipe because it's not the same thing every time. What would be, I guess, the the blend that would have the most like muscle relaxation, tension release ish. Because I know a lot of people look for pain relief, energy, focus all the time, and that's pretty easy. But then also too, it's also based on how your body works and how your body accepts the kratom. So it depends on that. But when you create these recipes for these blends, what do you look for other than just low mit, I guess? Or maybe, I guess the better question would be is, what would help you the most with muscle relaxation, tension release, and maybe some serotonin support?
Yeah, it's on the muscle relaxation side, that is most likely due to the Paynantheine side of the alkaloids in kratom. And so I would look for higher Paynantheine for muscle relaxation. And that's going to be more in our sunset blend, nightfall as well. So kind of more of the evening type names that we have. You also asked about
serotonin support. So like a lot of people forget that when you are in constant pain, whether it's like the chronic pain or muscle related or something, a lot of it has to do with your mental health also, because like a lot of my fibro customers who have fibromyalgia are in constant pain all the time, so they just get frustrated because they can never get comfortable. Imagine just a pain in your body that you can't get rid of and that's your life. It takes a toll on your mental health. So as you know, I'm very big on the mental health part of things, and I always get asked that question, but I mean, I'm not a doctor. I never really looked at the research to be able like, but this is what helps me. Midday helps me. And sunrise too, but
I mean, for me personally, kind of all of the kratom helps a little bit on my mood boost and kind of anxiety, that side. But then I've noticed that our hazelnut shots really help with my kind of antidepressant, just kind of feel like a mood boost and really feel kind of less depressed. I've also noticed that our super mints or high mitragynine also really helps with kind of an antidepressant effect for me. Because
I'm so sensitive to the high mint, but I really do like the kratom mints. But if I take the mangda, sometimes I feel like I'm very overstimulated. Maybe it's too much serotonin. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like, and that's where everyone's different as far as kind of how much do you need, how much it works for you can be very different than how much works for me. And so, yeah, that's where it's a hard, I guess, I can't recommend something for everyone because it's all so different. It's just kind of, there's quite a bit of complexity in there, and how, to your point, the individual person's body responds differently to kratom, how it metabolizes it, how it utilizes it. I mean, we do know that mitragynine is converted into 7-hydroxymitragynine inside the human plasma. And so our bodies are converting that naturally. And that is also different based on individuality. And so there's a lot of complexity to, first, what alkaloids are present in the kratom plants, then also how the body responds to it, and then any kind of metabolization or how the body changes some of those alkaloids into secondary alkaloids can also have a big effect on the overall benefits and use case of why people are doing it.
That's a good point, because I was listening to the podcast I just did with Madeline. She featured a podcast that I did with her this last Friday, and I actually finished listening to it on the way up here, and she mentioned that she was asking me to explain the different strains and how we kind of figure out the blends and stuff, which touches base into this topic. But she was saying that white strains make her friend fall asleep. And I was like, very interesting, because for me, white, it gives me the energy and definitely not fall asleep. So that just goes in to show that just because it works one way for one person doesn't necessarily mean it works the other way and all that stuff.
Yeah, and it would also be interesting to see test results of those white strains. Because we've talked about this so many times, that white, green, red are such a more marketing based term when it comes to kratom, and so much so that a lot of harvesters out there will simply go out and pick kratom leaves, put them in a plastic bag or under a tarp to kind of let the leaves decompose and change, let the chlorophyll essentially change into more of a reddish brown color. And that's how they end up creating red, versus actually going out and harvesting some of the red vein leaves. And so that is where there's a lot of complications in the market, that what's labeled as a white, green, or a red may not actually be associated to the alkaloids that people are looking to associate to the benefits that would typically be, okay, I want energy, I want pain relief, I'm going to associate it to this white vein. But there's a lot of vendors out there that just take whatever they can find and label it as white vein, put it out there. So that's where there's a lot of really big complications of what could be having that different effect for people.
Yeah, that's why a lot of times when external people ask me like, oh, this helps me with that. And it's like, I think it depends on the vendor and then where they source it from. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, we use the lab test results to kind of support the way we do our stuff. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong way, but I mean, it's science, so you can't
it's
argue
a little,
with science.
yeah. I mean, it's much better having that objective test to at least have as a starting point for our products versus just relying on someone telling us, some hearsay from Indonesia that this is a white vein, red vein, or green vein.
So then, obviously, this topic is about where Kratom's from. How did you come up with the system to be like, okay, obviously you guys figured out Kratom works. You guys loved it. You guys saw the inconsistency. How did you guys determine this is red or this is high Mitragynine, this is high or low Speciogynine, or how did you come up with that process with not knowing so much at that time? Or how did you feel confident enough to figure out the blends or I guess the recipes?
So Kratom, as we mentioned, is the name of the tree, and people will pick the leaf of the Kratom tree, dry it, make a powder out of it. And so that is what Kratom is the name of the tree. It's also the name of the leaves that are dried and made into a powder. Oh, we have some nice leaves back here behind us.
I forgot we changed the background a little bit.
And so my background is around engineering. And I worked for Hewlett-Packard for probably about 10 years, doing a lot of research and development, analytical development. And I got to work on these really interesting projects called kind of metrology development. And metrology is just the studying of measurement systems. And so it's just kind of, I was just fortunate enough to work on these projects of having to develop what's called kind of like a gauge or an instrument. And this is where there was a certain product at Hewlett-Packard that was produced, say, thousands of times, 100,000 times, millions of times, and they wanted to create some kind of system that would measure and make sure that that part or that product was produced the same time every time. And so metrology is this idea of we need to create an instrument that will look at certain characteristics of that product and output a number that will then tell us whether or not this product is the same and usable kind of for what it needs to do. And that's where I got this understanding of how to create instruments from scratch, essentially.
That makes a lot of sense.
And at the same time, and at the same time, because Hewlett-Packard was one of the original companies that created a lot of scientific instruments. So HPLCs, which are the kind of fundamental analytical chemistry instrument, or one of them at least, that we use to detect and quantify the amount of certain chemicals. HP was one of the founding companies that used to make those systems back in the day before they were I think in the early 90s, HP sold off part of that company that made the instruments into a company called Agilent. And so Agilent is one of still the main manufacturers of HPLCs and other analytical laboratory equipment. And because of that history that HP had, we obviously still had enormous amounts of equipment and analytical labs inside the company just because we needed to use that for our kind of day-to-day. Yes. And I mean, it was fortunate. Yeah, it was amazing because we just had this analytical lab, across several different buildings, and I could just submit test results. They would kind of do analysis, give it back to me. But I got really close and involved with it because it's like, well, I had all that accessible on a day-to-day basis and worked closely with those people that kind of created some of these systems to begin with. I also then had the job of creating my own analytical system for a product or certain set of products. And so it was just that kind of background that I got exposed to that made me kind of understand how these systems work, where the limitations are, how do you actually know that these numbers that are coming out of the machine are actually representing what you think they are versus just random noise in the environment. Like how does all that play together? I was just able to get that experience.
I've known you for 8 years. I never knew you had. I mean, I knew you worked at HP and stuff, and all I knew is that you were basically a problem solver. Like, hey, this machine's doing something. Figure out how to fix it. I didn't know you had all that background, so that makes sense. I just always, I guess, trusted your lead, so I never really questioned it. So it's good to know that you have that background, and that's why you do things the way you do.
Yes,
and why we do things here. It's the foundation of it.
And I think, that's also why we're willing to push things forward is because, a lot of times, like, these instruments are very expensive. You're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah. Like, the amount of money that goes into them are kind of crazy. But it was my job to make these things, and so I used to make things, break things, and then and it's one of those things where it can be like super. Yes, and that's the thing. It's like, but you also have to then learn how to fix them, and so it's very frustrating when it's like, well, this is a $50,000, $100,000 sensor, and then you mess it up, and it's like, oh, well, now I gotta fix it, or like go buy a new one and tell my manager that I need to go buy a new one. So it's one of those things that
make it work.
Because I had to do that, then I'm more comfortable kind of trusting the mathematics or trusting the process to be able to actually make changes, where I think if you're not exposed to that side, it's like, well, I would never want to like touch this $200,000 instrument because I might mess it up. But it's like, well, yeah, I've messed it up, but I've also had to rebuild it, improve it, make changes on it. So I think I was just fortunate enough to get that type of experience. That's how we're able to kind of push these instruments and do a little bit different analytical development that other people aren't necessarily exposed to and have an awareness to.
I have the same experience, obviously not like the engineering side like you, definitely. Like Bert and I worked in SeaWorld for so long, and I really dislike doing the trainings of the, the food training, the FIFOs, first in, first out, labeling, organizing, unpacking orders and all that. But honestly, I'm not gonna lie, it was a good foundation to what the production room is now because of all that training. And like even the front too, Bert and I are so unique on the way of how we do things because of that foundation, and I give SeaWorld the credit to that. And that's why I always say, like, if you want your kid to have a really good sense of work ethic and organization and stuff, maybe, I don't know about SeaWorld now, but put them in food industry, because Maribel's also in food industry. She does a really good job. She learns really quick. She's very organized and all that stuff. So it really does kind of play into the fact of, like, we all come from different areas, but all of those different areas were good foundation to create what we created today now.
Absolutely.
And it's pretty cool. And I'm really impressed by your background. Not that I wasn't already impressed already, but that makes a lot of sense. That's pretty cool. So I think that pretty much covers most of how or where Kratom is from and how we kind of do things. I think that's enough to cover, at least for now. I think we already know where Kratom is from overseas and all that stuff. And I don't know if you want to add anything else, or if you have...
Yes. Kratom, most of it comes from Indonesia, especially the commercial supply. And especially from West Kalimantan, so a certain large island of Indonesia is where a vast majority of Kratom is produced, at least for the U.S. and kind of worldwide commercial available supply. Thailand has now, as of, 2.5 years ago now, re-legalized Kratom. They have quite a bit of Kratom farms that are producing Kratom. However, most, if not all of their supply is really limited towards the in-country because they have such a demand, and they also focus a lot more on fresh leaves. So instead of drying the leaf and then making a dry powder out of it, a lot of the leaves in Thailand are consumed directly fresh, but that they don't really quite have the supply built up yet, or the cost structure actually to kind of bring a lot of Kratom into the U.S. They're still kind of working on scaling up that area.
And do you know this because you've been there yourself, or because that's just kind of like the haps, like what's going on in the industry?
No, it's because I've been there myself.
So it's how Thailand needs it for their own supply. What do they use? The same thing, just in a tea form or fresh leaf form?
Very similar as far as they use it for energy, pain relief, kind of boosting overall mood and health and well-being.
I'm not sure if they have the same resources as we do to be able to determine what's good for energy, what's good for like pain or muscle stuff, all that.
Yeah, so
how do they determine that? Do you
I mean, they need some help in that area, to be honest. So they do have. I did go get to tour a very nice laboratory that was set up by the government, associated with a local university, and what they were doing is creating kind of like this both cannabis innovation center as well as Kratom innovation center, and they had a lot of great pieces of analytical equipment set up. They had a lot of HPLCs. They had gas chromatography machines. They had quite a bit of great analytical laboratory. I mean, this was like at least like a 2-tower building, or maybe I think there maybe 2 major towers, and there's about 8 floors in each tower, and basically each tower had kind of like this nice setup of chemistry labs, analytical labs down the middle.
Wow,
you can kind of like walk around the outside.
Facility.
Oh, very big. I mean, very well funded. Had a lot of great. But however, looking at their results, they unfortunately need a little more help on some of the method development. And so the method, when it comes to analytical chemistry, is kind of the steps or the procedure that's followed to produce the results that we're looking for. And it, as you know, kind of from, as people know from cooking or baking, the steps and the process is very important in that side.
Yeah.
It's even more critical and important in analytical chemistry when you're trying to look for like a certain number of molecules and kind of quantify it. You have to do things in a very precise way, repeatable way. And so what we find is that this is something we early on found years ago, is that when we were sending Kratom out to different labs, depending on the method that the lab used, they would kind of over-report Mitragynine as a number because
I was gonna bring that up.
Because they
kind
weren't
of dumping it on a bucket, considering it all Mitragynine, but it's an actual like different levels of different alkaloids, but they weren't not sophisticated. The tools weren't sophisticated enough or not educated enough. They just didn't know how to isolate it to be able to narrow it down.
Yes, correct. And so basically this is Mitragynine, Speciociliatine, Speciogynine. They are isomers. So they are the same molecule in form of same number of carbon, hydrogens, oxygens, but they have a slightly different 3D shape. And so because they have the same molecular weight and they're very, very close, depending on the method or the analytical system used, sometimes, as you noted, instead of separating those 3 chemicals or alkaloids from each other, the machine will just look at those and say, oh, all 3 of those are the same. And that's why certain labs will over-report Mitragynine. It's gotten a lot better. So labs have done a much better resolving or separating out those molecules and reporting each individual molecule. But Thailand, in their labs, they still had the problem of separating out those molecules. And so what this happened was that they were having the same problem that we saw in the past, where they would test Kratom in their lab and they would say, oh, the alkaloids are great. It's like 2.1% Mitragynine. But then when we send it over, yes, but then when we send it over to the US and they retest, it comes back as only like 1.1%. Like, we don't know why it's so different. What's going on? It's like, well, yeah, we've seen that before. I can help you through that process.
So what I'm hearing is you're going to go to Thailand soon?
We hopefully should be, yes. There's quite a bit of, travel to be coming
That'd be cool. That'd be cool to be part of that process, to help them, and then just learning from that. Because I've learned a lot more by teaching than actually, like, the receiving end. It's more, you end up seeing things differently, and maybe if you do go to Thailand and you teach them a little bit more, then maybe it'll improve stuff over here too.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then Malaysia, they're not technically allowed to sell Kratom. There's a law against it, but they are still allowed to have a Kratom tree in their own yard and use it for kind of personal medicinal use. And so that's where there's actually still a lot of Kratom growing and consumption in Malaysia. It's just not done on really a commercial scale and really exported very well. And so they do have these small stands that Dr. McCurdy has talked about for a long time, where they'll take fresh Kratom leaves, put it in a pot of water, boil it for several hours, then kind of scoop that into small little bags, or kind of
the leaves?
The tea. They essentially make like a liquid, and so they just use a bag because it's much cheaper than a bottle over there. Like, it's very cost effective.
I think everywhere else uses a bag.
Yes, yeah. So they have these very small little stands that are kind of everywhere that people go, and it's kind of like their morning coffee equivalent. And so they use it to kind of just go work, be a little more energized, kind of get better throughout the day.
Do they do anything with the leaves at all? Kind of just
once they boil it, they kind of just discard the leaves, as far as I know.
Okay, so mostly the main source of kratom is grown in Indonesia.
Correct. Yes.
And then hopefully over here.
Yes, and I mean it is also surprising how large of a country Indonesia is. Example, I mean Indonesia, the population, they are the 5th most populated country in the world. So it's a very large country. I think they have like 230 million people on that order.
Wow.
And then also the islands, they have well over 300,000 islands of Indonesia. And the land mass, like those islands, it's kind of spread out, but it's if you overlay Indonesia on top of the 48 states of the U.S., you'll see that those islands cover kind of the entire 48 states. It's not fully filled in, but it's surprising because if I just think of Indonesia, I never thought of it as being such a large population. I didn't think of it as such a large land mass. And so even though they're islands, they have hundreds of thousands of islands, and then plus some of the islands are massive islands. That's why there's so much production of kratom, is because Indonesia, the land mass and the population, I think is just much larger than we think it is. That's why so much kratom is able to grow in that country, and why we can actually export it and import it into other countries.
So with Indonesia, is the kratom grown on the land side and not the island, or kind of like everywhere?
Well, all of Indonesia is technically kind of like an island, just how you did. I mean, West Kalimantan is a big island, but in Java is a separate island. There's kind of 3 major islands, but I mean, they're very,
Java,
very
like
large.
the coffee?
Yes, yeah, that's where a lot of
coffee.
Yeah, Indonesia grows, some of the best coffee in the world as well. That's why, I mean, they have a great climate. They have a lot of tropical jungles that they definitely produce a lot of great, jungle-based products, coffee, kratom. I mean, to give you an idea, they also produce the luwak coffee or the civet coffee.
Never heard of those.
So that's where a small animal, kind of like cat-like animal, will go out, eat the coffee cherries, and then it
Where's this going?
doesn't digest the coffee bean, and that passes through the civet coffee.
I knew where that was going.
So yes, so this is the civet poop coffee that people are very familiar with, or the luwak coffee.
Oh, I mean, it's been probably used for centuries, so I'm sure it's good.
Yeah.
Okay, that's funny.
All right. Any more questions on where kratom comes from?
I think that covers up pretty much where kratom is from and all that stuff. And you did a really good job of isolating the 3 areas and then also the alkaloids. So I think that covers a really good amount of information for new people. So thank you for that.
Excellent. Yeah. So thank you for tuning in and getting more insight onto the origins of kratom, where it comes from, and some of the alkaloids that are responsible for the beneficial effects. If you found value in today's episode or enjoyed listening to it, we'd greatly appreciate it if you supported the show by visiting ETHAnaturals.com for all of your botanical needs. Don't forget to follow our podcast page to stay updated on new episodes at ETHA Live Fully Podcast, and your support would really, really mean a lot to us. Today's topic was brought to us by you guys, and we really appreciate your support, your questions. Let us know if you have anything else you'd like us to cover in future episodes. If you have anything that you want to have us cover, please submit your questions in the Q&A section down below, or email us at podcasts@ethanaturals.com. Until next time, I'm Alexander.
I'm Amanda.
And I'm Nicole.
And as always, live fully.